I've been appropriately bad about this. I haven't been sharing very many videos. I haven't been particularly active on this forum. So I'm going to try and do something about that. I had done a reading during AuthorCon back in March, and I had intended to record it. However, my GoPro tends to overheat in areas with poor circulation. Therefore, it did not record. So I had suggested that I will go ahead and record a version of that reading and share it here, and I'm just finally getting around to doing that. So, without further ado, this is a reading from my novel, Innocence Ends, the remastered, reinterpreted version of it that was released through Uncomfortably Dark Horror just last summer. This is from chapter 20. Terror is the only reasonable response to what is happening. Terror is what Miles is experiencing now, overshadowing even the devastating sense of loss. Even his experiences on the battlefield are insufficient to insulate Miles from the sheer horror he feels as he races down the darkened streets, dodging from one pool of shadow to the next. Combat never came as a surprise when he was deployed to one hellhole or another. As much as he and his brothers and sisters might try to relax and occasionally let loose, they always knew where they were, and that hostile enemy territory could, at any time, present hostile situations. This was something else entirely. Being attacked and hunted in some small American town felt like something his grandfather or great-grandfather would have dealt with, but nothing he should have been prepared for. If this is something racially motivated, it's far and above anything he's ever prepared himself for. He's lost the men who were following him after he and Hewitt separated, but they can't be too far behind. Dodging into an empty yard and cutting through a dark alley seemed like a good idea when he'd done it, but he now begins to question the wisdom of avoiding his immediate threat by opening himself up to far more unknowns. A noise ahead of him sets his nerves on edge, and he slips further off the center of the alley and into what appears to be an empty backyard. The lack of light penetrating through the windows is fucking meaningless. The only operational electricity seems to be dedicated to the occasional street lamp. Something seems off about that, he muses, but there's nothing he can do about it now. The back door is locked, and he doesn't want to risk drawing any attention to himself by breaking the glass or attempting to bust the door down. Through the window, he sees nothing. No signs of movement, but he can't make out much detail. He doesn't trust that he's seeing everything he might need to see. He creeps along the side of the house, a tight squeeze between the home and the fence separating the adjoining property from this one. More noise from behind him, back in the alley, but he doesn't look back. The front of the house will leave him exposed. Nothing but a stereotypical picket fence along the sidewalk. But there's no movement he can see, and the house is mostly sheltered from the closest streetlight nearly half a block away. Silently, he rushes up the steps as fast as he can, without making a ruckus of it. The door handle turns easily in his hands, and he pushes the door open, wary that there could be anything waiting for him in the dark interior. He pulls the door closed again and slips along the wall to the right, trying to avoid standing out in silhouette at all. Miles crosses the dark living room, his movements slow and deliberate. The house appeared empty as he crossed the backyard and then peered through the first-floor windows that faced the alley. But that was no guarantee that the occupants weren't present. The door had been unlocked, which meant that there was a good chance he wouldn't be alone inside. And he had let himself in with all the stealth that he could manage, conscious of just how much risk he was taking. He stands silently in the entryway between the kitchen and the living space for close to 5 minutes, listening to the silence of the place, attuned to the slightest whisper of his breathing, until the sound of his pulse in his ears echoes like a drum. He doesn't make the slightest motion until he assures himself that nothing moves in the almost pitch-black interior of the residence. His foot descends softly, and the faintest creak of the floorboard beneath causes him to ultimately shift his full weight back to the other. His breath halts mid-exhale, and his eyes widen as he scans his surroundings with sweeping movements of his eyes, counting on his peripheral vision to catch anything that might pose a threat. His head remains, like the rest of his body, as still as a living statue, each muscle tense to react at the slightest impetus. Even within the deathly silent structure, he's aware that the noise couldn't have been a fraction of the volume that it was to him, but he's unwilling to risk the possibility of being discovered by anyone that might be there. There was no chance of the sound carrying beyond the walls, but still, Miles worries that his misstep could draw the attention of either of the threats currently roaming the town. The tension and heightened state of the fear are making him paranoid. He knows that. He's seen it countless times in war zones. But he's seen that same paranoia save plenty of lives, including his own. The kitchen holds little of value, though he grabs a butcher knife from the block on the counter, feeling better just having something he can use to defend himself as he searches the rest of the house. In the den, he discovers something that makes him want to cry tears of gratitude. Above the mantel is an older, over-under shotgun. It wouldn't have been his choice of firearm, but under the circumstances, it feels like a miracle being bestowed upon him. He moves as quickly as he can without risking tripping over something and slides the gun from the hooks that held it in place. For a moment, Miles' face displays a sense of awe and gratitude, like he was receiving communion. In a chest to the left of the fireplace, he finds the box of shells. Birdshot is not what he would have preferred, but it's better than nothing at all. He breaks the gun open and loads 2 shells. Slowly and carefully, Miles explores the ground level, checking every door, including those of pantries and cupboards. It's difficult without any light source to aid him in his search, but his eyes have adjusted enough that he doesn't want to risk destroying his night vision by using the flashlight feature on his phone or the small LED attached to his keychain. In the den again, he severs the legs of a table as quietly as possible, wanting to be sure that there's something other than the shotgun to rely on in a pinch, and something with better reach than the knife he's still carrying. The ground floor is clear, and it's time to head upstairs. The second stair from the top creaks beneath his weight, and he stops dead, slowing his breathing to listen to the noises of the house itself. The rain should have masked the sound, he hopes, but it would similarly mask any other noises he might need to hear. The landing of the second floor leads off to a single door on his right and a hall to his left, with 2 more doors in that direction, all of them closed. The room to his right is a simple bathroom, white tile floors aiding him in seeing that there's no one inside. The first door along the hall opens on a bedroom that appears to be a child's room, as empty as the rest of the house. The second door along the hall is open already, and he silently slips through and into what must be the master bedroom. He can't quite see the far edges of the room, but he feels the space around him open up. There's a sudden noise to his right, and Miles turns that direction, his feet sliding as he pivots. In the darkness, something latches onto him with hands clawing at him like a hungry animal, clutching at him and struggling to pull him towards it, or itself towards him. Either way, it amounts to the same thing. The shotgun in Miles' hands erupts with an almost deafening explosion that immediately sets his ears ringing, and the hands are no longer there holding onto him. Something wet and substantial hits the ground a few feet from where he stands. Almost immediately, he begins walking backward slowly towards the open doorway that he knows is there. And he can hear the hungry thing in the darkness shifting itself around, breath gurgling in its throat. He can't be sure where he hit it with the shot, but the damage has to be massive at that proximity. It drags itself across the floor, slipping out of the deeper shadows of the bedroom, the gender that it might have been before, disguised by the severity of its wound. Still, it moves inexorably forward, hauling itself toward him with single-minded focus, desperate to reach its prey even as the final traces of life begin to dissipate within it. There is no question that its momentum should have ceased, sometime before this. Everything he can make out in the darkness tells him this person should be dead, but somehow it just keeps dragging itself along, leaving a trail of blood punctuated by viscera at irregular intervals. Miles is grateful that he can't make out greater detail in the darkness, and that the blast from the shotgun had temporarily impacted his night vision. He'd seen some terrible things in combat, been party himself to some of the most monstrous actions that one human being can perform against another. But in the minute or so that he spent watching this creature crawl its way towards him in the half-light, he feels bile surging against his esophagus. Worse than the appearance, the hoarse, guttural groan that issues from its ravaged throat forces Miles' teeth to clench. Finally, Miles raises the table leg, wielding it like a sledgehammer, and brings it crashing down onto the ghoul's skull, again and again, until he can no longer distinguish between the sounds of splintering wood and bone. So much more silent than the shotgun that had initially shredded his body had been. The noise is still so much worse. He finally takes a moment to mutter a prayer to any gods that might be listening, that the sound of gunfire somehow hadn't managed to attract the attention of others like the thing he'd just dispatched. Perhaps within the same house. This simply cannot be happening, Miles whispers to himself as he begins to analyze what he can remember of the town's layout, working out the best route available back to Gale's home and the SUV he left parked there. Everyone else would be making their way as well. Anyone still alive, at least. But the rest of them don't all know about the firearms and ammunition that Miles carries in a false compartment in the back of every vehicle he owns. So he muses hopefully that Gale is armed, or that he makes it back there quickly enough for it to make a difference. It seems that his obsessive preparations for terrible scenarios has finally proven itself to be not only worthwhile, but imperative. He drops the splintered table leg, casting it aside with disgust. Miles heads downstairs and slips back through the front door, not knowing if the kitchen exit will be safe, and almost certain that the noise of the shotgun had gotten the attention of whatever had been moving around in the alley behind the house. Again, that was a reading from Innocence Ends, originally written over the course of decades, but originally published, self-published, in 2020, and then re-released after significant edits in 2024. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and please feel free to pick up a copy. I'd love to hear what you think.